AAA games. Many years ago, they were considered the pinnacle of gaming, achieving a level of commercial success that had never been seen before in the gaming industry. Backed by huge production values alongside new, innovative, and creative ideas that allowed you to escape your normal life and traverse worlds that held countless new adventures, their overwhelming dominance in the gaming industry led to some of the most successful and lucrative franchises that we still see today, such as Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Pokemon, Final Fantasy, and even Halo. However, after nearly 2 decades of dominance, everything slowly began to fall apart. The once unassailable dominance of AAA titles began to be plagued by escalating production costs, rise of competitors, and predatory monetization strategies that have ultimately led to the loss of trust from consumers. AAA games first began to emerge in the late 90s to early 2000s, with some of the first credited titles being Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and Metal Gear Solid. The budgets for these early AAA games were commonly anywhere from $1 to $10 million, which at the time was a completely unheard of amount to spend on something like video games. This money was being invested in anything from large team of developers to cutting edge hardware to marketing campaigns. This led to a multitude of successful titles, one after another. However, as time went on, consumers began wanting more and more. They were no longer satisfied with what companies were creating. They wanted better graphics and new, innovative games that would bring the gaming industry to the next level. This led to most AAA games in the late 2000s exceeding the cost of $20 million in just development alone, with some of these titles, like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Dead Space 2, to even exceed almost $50 million before any marketing. This allowed them to hire more developers and focus on new advancements to allow for better graphics. However, with the pressure from consumers to be forever evolving, it forced the cost of these games to grow even higher, and in the most recent years, budgets have commonly been seen exceeding $100 million, with games like Cyberpunk 2077, The Last of Us Part 2, and Callisto Protocol. This led to an egregious amount of pressure to be placed on developers and studios to deliver new cutting-edge games in quick succession. Developers had to begin taking bigger and bigger risks with each new announcement and release, which unfortunately led to a string of unpopular and buggy games. Ultimately, these failures led to developers to look for a different way to make a profit. They wanted to produce less games but make more money on each release, and the answer to this problem was the Battle Pass. With the rising cost of AAA games and the fact that developers were looking for a way to make more money off each game, this would lead them to a strategy known as predatory monetization. For those of you that don't know, predatory monetization is referred to as the implementation of aggressive or exploitative tactics within a game's monetization strategy with the primary goal of maximizing revenue at the expense of player experience. In other words, developers were looking for a way to maximize their gains with only doing a small amount more work than they were initially required to do. And in the late 2010s, this strategy blew up, with just about every online game having a battle pass, loot boxes, or some sort of microtransaction. However, as these practices became more widespread, they also sparked backlash from consumers for a multitude of reasons, with the first being the worry about the player's well-being. The main concern with player well-being is how addictive these systems became. Loot boxes in particular were often being compared to something as severe as gambling due to the randomized nature and the fact that the consumers were spending real money to buy them. This has led many countries around the world to either banning or proposing a bill about banning loot boxes in their entirety. Another reason players would scrutinize the strategy would be for the fairness of them. Many players couldn't afford to buy the Battle Pass or any other monetization practices, which led to a perceived imbalance that success and progression would be influenced not just by skill, but also by the amount of money spent. Now, for any of you saying, oh, well, the majority of games let you earn in-game currency for playing, so you don't actually have to spend any money. Let's be real. Most games that allow you to earn in-game currency give you a very minimal amount, which means you have to save it for a multitude of seasons before you can afford even a single battle pass. As the new predatory strategies became more and more common among AAA titles, players began to grow more and more distant from the developers and the games they were releasing. This led to an overall lack of trust that was previously held among AAA developers and the consumers. As this loss of trust evolved, consumers became more and more skeptical of any new AAA titles being released. With a few exceptions, most of these new games were being viewed as cynical cash grabs rather than the innovative experiences that they were formerly viewed as. With this disconnect growing more and more every year as developers prioritize short-term profit rather than long-term relationships, consumers are forced to look down different avenues to find new and enjoyable games that aren't viewed simply as another payday, but rather as a meaningful experience crafted with care and integrity. This would lead them to what we now know as indie games. Independent video games, also known as indie games, quickly began to take the industry by storm. Indie games are video games that are developed by incredibly small teams with little to no budget, often done as a passion project rather than a job. Now, some of you are probably asking something like, well, if they have no budget and a small team, how in the world are they competing with these massive multi-million-dollar developers? And honestly, it's a simple answer. Indie developers don't have harsh deadlines and a massive budget that they have to turn a profit on, so it allows them the freedom to experiment with new ideas and take creative risks that AAA developers simply can't do. They can imagine new worlds, make new gameplay mechanics, or simply just work on funny and goofy graphics. With examples of these games being things like Hollow Knight, Castle Crashers, Stardew Valley, and Binding of Isaac. This freedom and newfound creativity, alongside the fact that games are usually much cheaper with menial predatory monetization strategies, allows indie games to stand out in a market that was previously dominated with AAA titles. In doing so, indie developers would earn the trust and admiration of consumers previously held by AAA developers who were seeking innovative experiences without the concern of loot boxes or battle passes being shoved down their throat. All in all, the decline of AAA games signals a significant shift in the gaming industry as a whole. The once dominant force that was AAA titles has slowly begun to crumble as production costs of AAA games have become a burden more than anything else, predatory monetization strategies that are slowly driving consumers away as they don't want to spend tens of hundreds of dollars on a game they already bought, AAA developers losing the trust of consumers as they keep releasing underwhelming games just to make a quick profit, and the rise of passion-driven indie game developers. As the gaming industry continues to evolve, it's crucial that all developers take the lessons learned from the downfall of AAA games and strive to create new, innovative experiences that will resonate with players on a deeper level rather than just releasing games for a quick profit. By prioritizing things like creativity, player satisfaction, and ethical business practices, developers can rebuild the trust that was lost throughout the years. In the future, things like communication and transparency within the industry will be crucial to ensure that another rise and fall like AAA games won't happen again.